So this idea of a present connection, I know that you're definitely opposed to this idea that we are saved from all of eternity or belonging in that sense. So if this chosenness, this choosing, is something that only
Right.
happens once we are in Christ presently, as soon as we are saved and following, then why does he say before the foundation of the world? How does that relate? Because
that's a great question.
Obviously, we weren't in Christ before the foundation of the world.
Right. Great question. So, and I'm glad you asked that because that takes us back to Romans 6. So let me ask you this. Romans 6:2, he says, certainly not. How can we who died to sin live in it any longer? And then if we go to Galatians 2:20, I won't pull it up, but Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. There's places, I think it's Ephesians or Colossians, it's Colossians 2, back to the verse we referenced before, where he'll say, like, if you have died with Christ, why as though you are still living in the world? So basically, my question to you, to respond to your question to me, would be, when did we die with Christ? Like, have you been crucified? Like, I haven't been crucified. And so you and I were not literally crucified with Christ. Mm-hmm. But what is Romans 6 trying to tell us? I think it's trying to tell us that because we have been connected we have come into union with the one who was crucified, with the righteous one, his identity has been transferred freely to me. And so in Ephesians 1, when it says God has chosen us in him before the foundation of the world, I would see this as being a very, very similar concept as to where, again, God's laser focused on Jesus. God has, I think, ultimately God has chosen one person. God's ultimate choice came down to one person, and that is his son, Jesus. Yeah. And so again, yes, we weren't literally chosen before the foundation of the world, but just in the same way, we weren't literally crucified 2,000 years ago, around 30 AD, but Jesus was. And because I've come into union with him, because I've become connected to the one who was both crucified 2,000 years ago and the one who was chosen before the foundations of the world, I get Jesus's identity. God no longer looks at me like my past, my present, and my future. Jordan Hatfield's past, present, and future God has wiped it off the table. Like nothing that I am in myself, God is no longer relating to that. He's only relating to Christ's past, present, and future. It's as if he's put all of Christ, this eternal person, Jesus, he's put his identity on me. So I'm sorry, that's a really long-winded way, but I feel like I have no trouble with that passage in Ephesians 1 because I think it's the same idea that Paul, which would seem confusing in Romans 6, but I think it's the same kind of idea. We were past tense crucified with Christ, and we were past tense chosen in him. But again, I think all of this has to be taken in light of the fact that he's talking to people who are already in a connection with Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so does that make sense at all?
Yeah. It's, I guess maybe would you say that the before the foundation of the world is referring to Christ in a sense?
I think again, before the foundation of the world, like Jesus is the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. So again, going back to the verse you just referenced, the eternal purpose of God. Mm-hmm. Again, I think this all involves God's foreknowledge. God has always known, I think, from my perspective, the free will choices that man will make. And so God has always determined that he will win. Like he's ultimately, he's sovereign. I think he allows free decisions, but he's like the ultimate chess player that even though his opponent might be good at chess, God knows, and this person is making free will decisions to move the chess pieces wherever he will. God's so good at chess, he's going to win. I'm kind of stealing this analogy from Leighton Flowers, but I think it's a good one. I think in the same way, God has always known that Jesus is his plan in Christ will come to fruition. It will be fulfilled.
So that knowledge aspect, I won't get into that right now. It would take far too long. I would have some distinctions there, but yeah, I guess this idea. So in Romans 6, I know you've compared it a few times here. In verse 5, he says, we've been united with him in a death like his, and we shall certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. And so he makes it clear that it is metaphorical, that it is something that's not. We haven't literally died. We haven't literally been crucified. And so this idea of it not being a literal concept is specifically elaborated in Romans 6, but I don't see in Ephesians where that is specifically elaborated upon.
So I guess what I would ask is, so in verse 20, again, so one of the descriptors again is he talks about how we are, this is talking about Jesus, but you referenced it earlier. We are seated with him. I know it's right in front of my face right now, but I don't see it.
Ephesians 2 is where he talks about seated.
Ephesians 2:6. Okay, let me go there. So even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. So again, I think when Paul's using this terminology of in Christ Jesus, I would have a hard time making like putting what Romans 6 is referring to as something different than this. I think there's obviously a lot of metaphorical language being used all throughout Ephesians, I think 1, 2. But my point again is this idea that all of this, being seated in Christ, being chosen in Christ, I think it's just there's really no way of getting around that all of this is conditioned on this phrase here, in him, being true of whoever it is that these blessings are being given to. And so that was a confusing way of saying it. Basically, if you're chosen, that's conditional on being in him.